You know, when I first gave some thought to this whole Colin Kaepernick controversy, I had a lot of different feels about it. Wasn't sure what sort of angle to take on it at first. At first, I was going to, take the free speech angle, talk about how, well, as a legal matter, there's no First Amendment issue here, since, as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, no one seems to be calling on the government to punish Colin Kaepernick for not standing up for the national anthem. And as a moral right, I don't know that his moral right to free speech is being violated, since really what's happening is people are exercising their own right to free speech to express their disagreements, not even so much with the substance of what he's saying and the message he's trying to convey, as with the method by which he's trying to convey it. And then I thought to myself, well, I don't know. It's easy to say that in not too many sentences, not too many minutes, wouldn't be enough to fill up a whole video. So I gave some thought to the whole question of the tactics he used themselves. Do they make sense? Don't they? I'm not terribly sympathetic to all of Colin Kaepernick's contemners who are blasting him for supposedly disrespecting the military. I've heard a lot of pro-military rhetoric in the responses to Colin Kaepernick, and frankly that doesn't make much sense to me either, just because neither the flag nor the national anthem represents the military specifically. Each one represents the whole country. Why are so many people interpreting Colin Kaepernick's decision to sit during the national anthem before football games as criticism of the military specifically? I think a lot of folks really don't seem to have their heads on straight when they're reacting to this whole situation. At the same time, I'm not sure that Colin Kaepernick's protest is going to end up doing much good, simply because the methods that he's chosen of getting his point across have proven so controversial in and of themselves that they're distracting and diverting attention away from the substance of the message. That's the problem I see with these kinds of protests that sort of target symbols of American identity or American patriotism that are considered to be sacred by a lot of people. Personally, in principle, I don't have anything against these kinds of protests, but as a practical matter and as a strategic matter, I don't know that they're likely to be that effective. So that's really the one sort of critique that I would offer of Colin Kaepernick's protest. I mean, at the end of the day, if you have a lot of folks out there who are simply complaining about his having supposedly disrespected the national anthem or disrespected the country itself or the military or the flag or what have you, however wrong those folks may be, the fact of the matter is people are talking more about that than they are talking about police brutality and whatnot. What's more, at the end of the day, I'm also concerned that this kind of protest might alienate a lot of ordinary Americans who might otherwise be persuadable. Most ordinary people in the United States obviously venerate the flag and the national anthem and all these other traditional symbols of American identity and unity, right? So if you're perceived as desecrating any of those symbols, you run the risk of rubbing all those folks the wrong way. So much the wrong way that you might actually end up driving them into the arms of all of the opponents of criminal justice and police reform out there. The Donald Trumps, the Rudy Giulianis, the Breitbart crowd, and all of those characters. So I'm concerned that by sitting during the national anthem, and especially by doing things like wearing a pair of socks with images of police officers as pigs on them, by doing things like that, by pulling those kinds of stunts, someone like Colin Kaepernick may actually end up shooting himself and, more importantly, his cause in the foot. In addition to that, I think that this whole controversy just reinforces a point that I made a couple of months ago in my video about whether Justin Timberlake is a cultural appropriator. One of the things I mentioned was that we should let artists be artists, let entertainers be entertainers, and focus on what it is that they actually do for a living instead of expecting them necessarily to be social critics or political leaders or moral role models. In the same way that there's nothing about what Justin Timberlake does for a living, singing songs, that necessarily makes him qualified to be some kind of representative of the black struggle simply because he performs black music. In much the same way, there's nothing about what Colin Kaepernick does for a living, throwing balls into end zones and crashing into other heavily muscled rich men at high speeds and getting concussions and tearing ACLs and whatnot. There's nothing about that qualifies someone like him to be an expert analyst of complicated and contentious public policy issues like police brutality. That's not to say that people in their position shouldn't ever speak on these issues. I applaud them when they choose to do so, like I mentioned in the Justin Timberlake video, but at the end of the day, I don't think we should necessarily expect too much from folks in those lines of work because at the end of the day, I don't think they're necessarily any more qualified to speak as experts on those issues than your average person out there. I guess at the end of the day, I would say I agree with the message Colin Kaepernick wanted to send, at least for the very most part. I'm not a huge fan of the tactic by which he chose to get the point across, but he has the right to use that tactic, and I'll always defend that right. I think it's important to distinguish criticism and condemnation of his use of that tactic and the substance of his message from efforts to censor him or muzzle him or violate his right to free speech in any realm, legal or moral. Maybe we just shouldn't make that big a deal out of a protest like his. He is an athlete after all. The man chases balls for a living. So even if you don't agree with his message or his methods, try not to get too hung up on it.